Classic Silver Age Thor. In 1962, Stan Lee had a problem. He'd already created the Hulk, the strongest hero in comics. Now he needed someone even stronger. His solution: steal from mythology. How do you make someone stronger than the strongest person? Lee later explained. It finally came to me. Don't make him human, make him a god. Journey into Mystery introduced Thor in August 1962, designed by Jack Kirby. The look became instantly iconic. Winged helmet, red cape, black bodysuit with silver discs on the chest, and yellow boots. The blue and red color scheme wasn't an accident. It visually linked Thor to Superman, because Lee understood that readers already associated those colors with power. But Kirby's design contained a deliberate lie. The winged helmet owes more to Wagnerian opera than to anything Vikings actually wore. Real Norse warriors didn't look like this. Marvel's Thor was built for comic book pages, not historical accuracy. The bare arms were a conscious choice in an era when most superheroes wore full-coverage costumes. Kirby wanted to emphasize Thor's physique, the wide torso, the massive arms, as a visual statement of divine strength. This design remained virtually unchanged for over 2 decades. Other artists came and went, but the core elements stayed locked: helmet, cape, discs, boots. When you needed to draw the most powerful Avenger, you drew those elements. Beta Ray. Bill Thor arrived in November 1983. And its cover showed something that shouldn't have been possible: a horse-skulled alien smashing the comic's logo while wielding Mjolnir. Writer-artist Walt Simonson had just begun his legendary run, and he started by creating a character specifically designed to make readers uncomfortable. I wanted him to have a monstrous look as a visual, Simonson later explained, so that everyone would think he's a bad guy. The plan worked. Marvel received letters asking why this monster was lifting Thor's hammer. That was exactly the reaction Simonson wanted. Beta Ray Bill's design begins with a horse's skull, then pushes into something more alien, a face that suggests death and beauty simultaneously. Horses are beautiful creatures, Simonson noted. So what I was aiming for is a sense of death, a sense of monster, underlined by beauty. The gap behind the teeth, the elongated face, every detail was calculated to challenge readers' assumptions about worthiness. The costume itself is nearly identical to Thor's. That was also deliberate. Simonson wanted readers to understand immediately that this creature possessed Thor's full power. Same discs, same cape, same visual language. When Bill strikes his weapon and transforms, the costume announces that he's not copying Thor. He's earned the same power through worthiness. Bill became the first character outside Asgard to lift Mjolnir. Odin eventually gave him his own hammer, Stormbreaker, but the design principle remained: the costume of a warrior who looks like a nightmare but fights like a god. Battle armor: Thor. In 1987, Hela, the Asgardian goddess of death, placed a curse on Thor that should have been a gift. She made him truly immortal. He couldn't die no matter how severe his injuries. The catch: his bones became brittle as glass, and his wounds would never heal. Thor broke his arm fighting the Marauders during the Mutant Massacre. Tony Stark designed an armored cast for his friend's left arm, but Thor needed more than a cast. He needed full protection for a body that could shatter but never die. He forged the rest of his armor himself at Damascus Steel, the same forge where he'd once reforged Mjolnir. The mighty Thor introduced the full battle armor in January 1987, still written by Simonson with art by Sal Buscema. The look was striking: blue and gold plating covering his entire torso and arms, a design that looked more medieval knight than Norse god. Thor also grew a beard during this period, to hide the scars that now covered his face and would never fade. This armor represented something new for Thor: vulnerability. The most powerful Avenger was now held together by metal because his own body couldn't be trusted. Every fight carried the risk of injuries he'd carry forever. The costume made his curse visible. The armor lasted until Thor found a way to force Hela to lift her curse. But for readers who followed Simonson's run, it remains one of Thor's most memorable looks: the suit that showed what happens when a god becomes both invincible and fragile. Destroyer armor: Thor. Thor number 381 to 382 marked the end of Walt Simonson's legendary run, and he finished with Thor wearing something that shouldn't have been possible: the Destroyer, Odin's ultimate weapon, now wielded by his son against the goddess of death. By this point, Hela's curse had reduced Thor's body to near pulp after his battle with the Midgard serpent. He couldn't die, that was the curse, but he existed in unimaginable agony, his bones shattered, his flesh barely holding together. When Loki reformed the Destroyer armor and sent it against Thor, the god of thunder made an impossible choice. He projected his consciousness into the Destroyer and took control. The image is unforgettable: the Destroyer armor wearing Thor's cape and belt, wielding Mjolnir, marching into Hell to confront Hela directly. Thor pretended the Destroyer's murderous programming was taking over, that he couldn't stop it from threatening to destroy Hela's entire realm. She believed the bluff. Facing the annihilation of everything she ruled, Hela lifted her curse and restored Thor's body. The destroyer armor had always been a villain, an unstoppable weapon sent against Thor by his enemies. Simonson transformed it into Thor's ultimate trump card. When your own body fails completely, you borrow something indestructible and use your enemy's weapon as your salvation. After Thor returned to his restored body, he left the destroyer encased in crystal in Hell. Simonson's run ended with Thor victorious, and subsequent creators reverted to the classic Kirby design. But the destroyer sequence remains the most dramatic armor change in Thor's history, the moment he stopped being a warrior wearing armor and became the armor itself. The Psyker MCU Thor, when costume designer Alexandra Byrne began work on Thor in 2011, she faced an impossible challenge: translate Jack Kirby's 1962 design into something that could work on a living human being. Director Kenneth Branagh hired her specifically because she'd won an Oscar for Elizabeth, the Golden Age. If anyone could make Norse god fashion look real, it was someone who'd dressed royalty before. Byrne went straight to the source. "I work very much by looking," she explained. "I flip through all kinds of books to find the unexpected." In this case, the books belonged to her son. His Thor comics became her research materials. The resulting armor took the silver and red palette from the comics, but grounded it in practical metalwork that looked worn and functional rather than theatrical. The cape nearly defeated them. "Every time we said cape, someone would say, 'That'll be done in post,'" Byrne recalled. "But our cape does work, because we made it before we drew it." Her team created a graveyard of capes that didn't work before finding the right combination of cutting, bonding, and weighting. The final cape moves naturally without CGI assistance. Chris Hemsworth presented his own challenge. "He was working hard in the gym and we were tracking his body," Byrne noted. The production initially planned for a muscle suit to enhance his physique. They didn't need it. It's all him. But his bulk did create problems. During the final costume test, his hands started going numb. The costume was too tight for his actual muscles. Byrne's defining insight: his muscular arms are the iconic statement of Thor, and the discs and red cape are the iconic statements of the costume. Every subsequent MCU Thor design maintains these elements. The arms stay visible, the cape stays red, the discs remain on his chest, everything else can change. Ragnarok Gladiator. Armor. Thor. Ragnarok threw out everything previous Thor films had established about costume design. Director Taika Waititi wanted the film to look like Jack Kirby's original artwork had exploded across the screen, and costume designer Maze C. Rubeo made that vision literal. "He told us all to look at Jack Kirby," Rubeo explained. "The look of the movie is an homage to Jack Kirby because he was an excellent artist and one of the most important comic book artists and creators of all times. The result was the most colorful Thor film ever made, and the most difficult costume design challenge." For Thor's gladiator armor on Sakaar, Waititi pushed his artists to abandon traditional design logic. "He wanted us to go full-on Jack Kirby," concept artist Andy Park recalled. "He wanted us to embrace the idea of Sakaar being garbage world. So, a lot of disparate parts." Waititi insisted on primary colors that didn't match: red, blue, yellow, and armor pieces that looked scavenged rather than crafted. "As a designer, that's going against everything you know," Park admitted. "How do you make something look cool and still have everything? And every color of the rainbow?" Some early designs went too far and had to be pulled back. But the final Sakaar armor captures exactly what Waititi wanted. Thor stripped of his royal status, fighting in borrowed scraps. Weta Workshop created the physical helmet with wing cheek guards that move up and down, the most dynamic version of Thor's classic winged helmet ever seen on screen. "This is probably the most amount of color we've used on a costume job," noted supervising production manager Danielle Prestige. "The gladiator armor represents Thor at his lowest point. No hammer, no kingdom, no identity, except what he can scavenge, which makes it one of his most honest costumes." The mighty Thor. In 2014, Thor became unworthy of his hammer. The original Odinson wandered the cosmos, broken, while someone else lifted Mjolnir. For months, Marvel kept her identity secret. Jane Foster, dying of cancer, now the goddess of thunder. Writer Jason Aaron conceived Jane's Thor during the original Sin event, where Nick Fury whispered something to Thor that stripped him of worthiness. But the visual design came from artist Esad Ribic, who drew Jane's first appearance in Thor, God of Thunder, number 25. When artist Russell Dauterman joined to draw the ongoing series, he refined Ribic's concept into the version that would define the character. Jane's costume shares DNA with Thor's classic look: red cape, silver elements, winged helmet, but the execution differs entirely. The helmet fully covers her face, hiding her identity. The color palette runs darker, with blacks and silvers replacing the bright blues of Thor Odinson's suit. The Asgardian symbology appears more prominently than in any previous Thor costume, marking her as something new rather than a copy. Aaron and Dodderman's collaboration happened almost entirely through editor Will Moss. They only met in person after their 38-issue run ended. Despite minimal direct contact, the creative partnership produced one of Thor's most celebrated eras, a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end about a woman fighting cancer who becomes a god between chemotherapy sessions. When Thor, Love and Thunder adapted Jane's story for film, costume designer Maze C. Rubeo took Dodderman's design nearly panel for panel. The helmet remains the signature element, a warrior's mask that transforms a dying woman into something eternal. Thor's costumes have always told stories about power, who has it, who's worthy of it, who's lost it. From Jack Kirby's operatic original to Jane Foster's cancer fighter's armor, each suit answers the same question differently. What does a god wear when they have something to prove?